They say blood is thicker than water, but nobody warns you when that blood turns to poison. I learned this lesson at 62, when my son asked me to pretend I was dead. My name is Maria Santos, and for 15 years, I have been cleaning office buildings in downtown Chicago. My hands are rough, my back aches most mornings, and my English carries the accent of my childhood in El Salvador. But I take pride in my work. Every floor I mop, every window I clean is done with care. I came to this country when my son Danny was 7. His father had left us when Danny was barely walking. So it was just Danny and me against the world. I worked 3 jobs to keep us afloat. During the day, I cleaned houses. In the evenings, I worked at a laundromat while Danny did homework at a small table in the corner. On weekends, I cleaned offices, bringing Danny because I could not afford a babysitter. Those early years were exhausting but proud. Danny was bright, always asking questions. When he struggled with English, I sat with him for hours, both of us learning from his textbooks. When he wanted to join soccer but we could not afford equipment, I worked extra shifts for his cleats. When he dreamed of college, I saved every spare dollar, eating rice and beans most nights. Danny excelled in school and earned a partial scholarship to State University. I cried through his entire graduation ceremony. He was going to have opportunities I never had. College changed Danny. He came home less, and when he visited, he seemed uncomfortable in our small apartment. He would look around with embarrassment, as if seeing it through someone else's eyes. The walls that housed our memories suddenly seemed too thin, too worn, too poor. After graduation, Danny got a marketing job downtown. He moved to a sleek apartment in a trendy neighborhood, the kind of place I cleaned but could never afford. He started dressing differently, talking differently, surrounding himself with friends who drove expensive cars and ate at restaurants where one meal cost more than my weekly groceries. I should have seen the signs. How he changed subjects when friends asked about family. How he met me for lunch at cheap diners far from his office. How he stopped calling me Mama and started calling me Maria, creating distance through formality. For 5 years, I watched my son transform into someone I barely recognized. He got promoted twice, moved to an even nicer apartment, started dating Jessica, who worked in finance. Danny seemed happy, and I convinced myself his happiness was worth my growing loneliness. I continued cleaning the same buildings, riding the same buses. I had friends among other cleaning ladies, women who understood invisible labor. Maria Elena, who cleaned law offices, became especially close. She had raised 4 children alone and possessed wisdom from years of quiet endurance. Maria Elena first suggested something was wrong with how Danny treated me. We were sharing coffee in the Meridian Building break room. "You know, Maria," she said, "my oldest son makes good money now. Has his own house, family, but every Sunday he visits me. Every Sunday. He brings his children so they know their abuela. He asks about my work, health, dreams. That is what a good son does." "When was the last time Danny visited you?" she asked gently. 3 months. Maybe 4. "And when did he last ask about your life? Really ask about your hopes, struggles, your day?" I could not answer because the truth was too painful. Danny had not asked me a meaningful question in years. Our conversations centered entirely on him. His job, girlfriend, apartment, plans. I had become an audience to his life rather than a participant. That night, I forced myself to confront reality. My relationship with Danny had become one-sided. I gave emotional support, financial help, unconditional love. In return, I received brief calls, hurried visits, and the growing sense that I was an embarrassment he tolerated. The wake-up call came on a Tuesday evening in November. Danny called, his voice strained. "Maria," he said, the formality stinging. "Jessica and I are going to her company holiday party. Important people will be there. Her colleagues have been asking about my family, my background." The words hit like cold water. Building maintenance, he called my work, as if honest labor that paid for his education was shameful. Maybe you could say you work in building services or facility management. It sounds more professional. My hand shook holding the phone. I understand you are ashamed of me, I said quietly. It is about perception, fitting in. You do not understand how competitive my industry is. Then prove it, I said. Bring me to this party. Introduce me as your mother who cleans offices. The silence was answer enough. I cannot do that. This is too important. Then I think we understand each other perfectly. I hung up and sat in my kitchen feeling clean, sharp anger. Not hot rage, but steady fury from finally seeing truth clearly. 2 weeks later, I called Danny and asked to meet for lunch. He chose a small cafe far from downtown. He looked polished in expensive clothes, handsome like his father but with calculation his father never had. Halfway through our meal, he said something that changed everything. I have been thinking about our phone conversation. I think I have a solution that works for both of us. I set down my sandwich. Jessica and I have been talking about marriage. When that happens, it might be good if we let the past be the past. Start fresh. What exactly are you saying? Jessica comes from doctors and lawyers. They move in circles where image matters. It might be easier if we simplified the story. Told people my mother passed away when I was young. Clean slate, no awkward explanations. The restaurant tilted around me. You want me to pretend to be dead? Not dead exactly. Just absent. You could have your life, I could have mine. I stared at this stranger wearing my child's face, feeling something break that would never heal. Get out, I said quietly. Maria, you are being dramatic. I stood up, legs shaking. The practical solution to my complicated problem is to forget I ever had a son. I walked out without looking back, even when Danny called my name. I rode the bus home with tears streaming down my face, mourning not just my son but the illusion that I had raised him to be a good man. The next weeks were the darkest of my life. I had built my identity around being Danny's mother. Without that, I felt lost, empty, unsure what my life had been for. Maria Elena noticed immediately. She sat with me during breaks, offering quiet comfort. I realized these women had become more family than my own son. 3 weeks later, I was cleaning the executive offices when I found myself in Margaret Winter's office, the CEO. On her desk was a framed photo of an older woman in simple dress and apron. When Mrs. Winters walked in, she noticed me looking at the photograph. That is my mother, she said. She worked as a seamstress her whole life. Raised 5 children alone after my father died. I keep her picture to remind me where I came from. I used to be embarrassed by her. When I was in business school, I wanted to reinvent myself. I thought success meant leaving the past behind. She looked at me directly. It took years to realize my mother's strength, her dignity. Her willingness to provide for her family were not things to be ashamed of. They were the foundation of everything I achieved. The best parts of who I am came from watching her. You have children? She asked gently. One son. I used to be proud of him. I found myself telling her everything. She listened without judgment. I am sorry, she said finally. That must be incredibly painful. But I want you to know something. I have watched you work here for years. You are thorough, reliable, respectful. You take pride in what you do. Your son may not see your value, but others do. 2 months later, my phone rang. Jennifer Walsh from Comprehensive Building Services said Margaret Winters had recommended me for a supervisor position. Better pay, more responsibility, more respect. The interview went perfectly. They offered me the job immediately, with almost double my salary. I started 3 weeks later. For the first time, I had an office, a desk, a business card with my name. I supervised cleaning operations in 12 buildings, managed schedules, trained employees. It was challenging but deeply satisfying. More importantly, it changed how I saw myself. I was not just Maria the cleaning lady. I was Maria Santos, operations supervisor. I had knowledge, experience, value beyond my willingness to work hard. 6 months later, Danny texted, "Hey Maria, Jessica and I got engaged. Thought you should know." I waited for pain but felt only pity. I thought about the life he was building, the family legacy he was eager to disown. I thought about grandchildren I might never meet, celebrations I would not be invited to. But I also thought about Margaret Winter's mother, about pride in heritage, about my journey from invisible worker to respected supervisor. I deleted Danny's message without responding. That evening, I called Maria Elena for dinner. We sat in my kitchen where I had once cried over Danny's rejection, talking about our children, work, dreams. This was what family felt like. Not performance or obligation, but genuine interest, mutual respect, shared joy. As she prepared to leave, Maria Elena hugged me tightly. "You look different. Stronger. Happier. I feel like myself again." Over the following months, I built my new life. I developed friendships with colleagues who saw me as equal. I took evening business classes, discovering talents that had been dormant. I started saving for my own dreams, not someone else's. I bought proper clothes, got my hair styled professionally. I treated myself with the care I had once given exclusively to my son. 1 year later, I was promoted to regional manager. Significant salary increase, company car, responsibility for the entire metropolitan area. I managed over 200 employees and worked with building owners and corporate clients. The day I received the promotion, I treated myself to dinner at an upscale restaurant downtown. As I sat alone enjoying good food and wine, I felt deep satisfaction that had nothing to do with anyone else's approval. Halfway through my meal, I noticed a familiar young man at a nearby table with a woman who must have been Jessica. It was Danny. I considered leaving quietly, then remembered Margaret Winter's photograph, Maria Elena's loyalty, my own hard-won self-respect. I finished my meal and walked past Danny's table. He looked up, recognition and shame flickering across his face. "Hello, Danny." "Maria," he stood awkwardly. "This is Jessica." "Jessica, this is Maria." I shook Jessica's hand pleasantly. "Nice to meet you." "Danny, you look well." He mumbled about being surprised to see me, about how long it had been. "I'm doing very well. I was just promoted to regional manager at Comprehensive Building Services. I manage operations for most downtown commercial buildings." His eyes widened. My company was well known, respected. My title carried weight in his professional world. "That is wonderful," he said, genuinely impressed for the first time in years. "Yes, it is." "Well, enjoy your evening." "Nice meeting you, Jessica." As I walked away, I heard Jessica ask who I was. I did not stay for Danny's answer, but hoped someday he would be brave enough to tell the truth. The encounter left me thoughtful but not upset. My feelings toward Danny had evolved from hurt and anger to something closer to indifference. He was no longer the center of my emotional world, no longer the measure of my worth. He was simply someone I used to know very well who had chosen to exclude me. 6 months later, I received a wedding invitation addressed to Maria Santos with no personal note. I studied this evidence that Danny had decided to include me in his narrative after all. At least enough to invite me to witness his marriage. I RSVP'd that I would not be attending. Instead, that weekend, I drove to the lake with Maria Elena and her family. We had a picnic, played with her grandchildren, watched the sunset. It was perfect, full of laughter and warmth and unconditional love I had once thought could only come from blood relatives. As I watched Maria Elena's grandson teach his sister to skip stones, I felt profound peace. This was family. Not obligation and performance and conditional love, but chosen connection, mutual care and respect and joy in each other's presence. That evening, Sitting on my balcony looking at city lights, I reflected on my journey. 3 years ago, I had been a broken woman mourning a relationship that had never been as loving as I believed. I had been defined entirely by my role as Danny's mother, devastated by his rejection. Now I was Maria Santos, regional manager, respected colleague, loyal friend. I had built a life that belonged entirely to me, filled with people who valued me for who I was. I had learned to love myself with the fierce devotion I once reserved for my son. The phone rang. An unknown number. "Hello, Maria." The voice was tentative. "This is Danny. Could we maybe talk sometime? Meet for coffee?" I was quiet, checking my feelings. What I found was not anger or hurt, but calm indifference. "I do not think that would be a good idea. Please, Maria. I know I made mistakes. I hurt you. I would like to make things right. Some things cannot be made right, Danny. They can only be learned from. But we are family." "No. Family is about love and respect and showing up for each other. You chose not to be my family 3 years ago. I have learned to be fine with that choice. I wish you well. I hope you have a good marriage and happy life. But I am not interested in being part of it." I hung up and turned off the phone. Then I sat back and watched city lights twinkle in darkness. Somewhere out there was the son I had raised, the man who broke my heart, the person who taught me that love without respect is not really love. But here, in my apartment filled with photos of chosen family, with books I was reading for pleasure, with plans I was making for my future, was the life I had built from the ashes of that broken relationship. It was smaller than I had once imagined, quieter than I had once wanted, but it was entirely mine. For the first time in my adult life, that felt like more than enough. Dormant for years. I started saving money not for someone else's dreams but for my own, small plans that felt revolutionary in their selfishness. I bought myself new clothes that fit properly and made me feel professional. I got my hair cut and styled in a way that made me look polished rather than invisible. I started going to museums on weekends, taking myself to lunch at nice restaurants, treating myself with the same care I had once lavished exclusively on my son. The transformation was not just external. I felt different in my body, more confident in my movements, more willing to take up space in the world. When I walked into meetings now, I spoke up, offered opinions, disagreed when necessary. The quiet, self-effacing woman who had raised Danny was still part of me, but she was no longer the whole story. 1 year after starting my supervisor position, I was promoted again, this time to regional manager. The promotion came with a significant salary increase, a company car, and responsibility for operations across the entire metropolitan area. I was now managing over 200 employees and working directly with building owners and corporate clients. The day I received the promotion, I treated myself to dinner at an upscale restaurant downtown, the kind of place I had once only seen from the outside while taking the bus home from work. As I sat alone at my table, enjoying good food and wine, I felt a deep sense of satisfaction that had nothing to do with anyone else's approval. Halfway through my meal, I noticed a young man at a nearby table who looked familiar. It took me a moment to realize it was Danny. He was with a woman who must have been Jessica, both of them dressed expensively, both of them looking around the restaurant as if assessing their fellow diners. For a moment, I considered leaving quietly, avoiding any potential confrontation. Then I remembered Margaret Winter's photograph, Maria Elena's fierce loyalty, my own hard-won self-respect. I finished my meal slowly, paid my bill, and walked past Danny's table on my way out. He looked up as I approached, and I saw recognition and something that might have been shame flicker across his face. "Hello, Danny," I said calmly. "Maria," he said, standing awkwardly. "This is Jessica." "Jessica. This is Maria." I extended my hand to Jessica, who shook it with obvious confusion. "Nice to meet you," I said pleasantly. "Danny, you look well." He mumbled something about being surprised to see me. about how long it had been, about hoping I was doing well. I could see him trying to calculate whether his fiancée would put together who I was, whether this encounter would complicate the story he had constructed about his past. "I am doing very well," I said. "I was just promoted to regional manager at Comprehensive Building Services. I manage operations for most of the commercial buildings in the downtown area." I saw his eyes widen slightly. The company I now worked for was well known, respected, successful. My new title carried weight in his professional world. "That is wonderful," he said. And for the first time in years, he sounded genuinely impressed rather than condescending. "Yes, it is," I agreed. "Well, I should let you two enjoy your evening. It was nice meeting you, Jessica." As I walked away, I heard Jessica ask who I was. I did not stay to hear Danny's answer, but I found myself hoping that someday he would be brave enough to tell her the truth. The encounter left me thoughtful but not upset. I realized that my feelings toward Danny had evolved from hurt and anger to something closer to indifference. He was no longer the center of my emotional world, no longer the measure by which I judged my own worth. He was simply a person I used to know very well, someone who had chosen to exclude me from his life. 6 months later, I received a wedding invitation in the mail. It was formal, expensive, addressed to Maria Santos with no personal note. I studied it for a long time, this evidence that Danny had decided to include me in his narrative after all, at least enough to invite me to witness his marriage. I RSVP'd that I would not be attending. Instead, that weekend, I drove to the lake with Maria Elena and her family. We had a picnic, played with her grandchildren, watched the sunset over the water. It was a perfect day, full of laughter and warmth, and the kind of unconditional love I had once thought could only come from blood relatives. As I watched Maria Elena's grandson teaching his little sister to skip stones, I felt a profound sense of peace. This was family, I realized. Not the obligation and performance and conditional love I had experienced with Danny, but this chosen connection, this mutual care and respect and joy in each other's presence. That evening, as I sat on my small balcony looking out at the city lights, I reflected on the journey that had brought me here. 3 years ago, I had been a broken woman mourning the loss of a relationship that had never been as loving as I had believed. I had been defined entirely by my role as Danny's mother, devastated by his rejection, lost without his approval. Now I was Maria Santos, regional manager, respected colleague, loyal friend. I had built a life that belonged entirely to me, filled with people who valued me for who I was rather than what I could provide. I had learned to love myself with the same fierce devotion I had once reserved for my son. The phone rang, interrupting my thoughts. It was an unknown number, but something made me answer. "Hello, Maria." The voice was tentative, uncertain. "Yes? This is Danny. I was wondering, could we maybe talk sometime? Meet for coffee?" I was quiet for a long moment, not from surprise but from the need to check in with my own feelings. What I found was not anger or hurt, but a kind of calm indifference. "I do not think that would be a good idea," I said gently. "Please, Maria. I know I made mistakes. I know I hurt you. I would like to try to make things right." "Some things cannot be made right, Danny. They can only be learned from." "But we are family," he said, and I could hear desperation creeping into his voice. "No," I said, and the word came out clear and strong. "Family is not about blood or obligation. It is about love and respect and showing up for each other. You chose not to be my family 3 years ago. I have learned to be fine with that choice. I wish you well, Danny. I hope you have a good marriage and a happy life. But I am not interested in being part of it." I hung up the phone and turned it off. Then I sat back in my chair and watched the city lights twinkle in the darkness. Somewhere out there was the son I had raised, the man who had broken my heart, the person who had taught me that love without respect is not really love at all. But here, in my small apartment filled with photos of my chosen family, with books I was reading for pleasure, with plans I was making for my own future, was the life I had built from the ashes of that broken relationship. It was smaller than I had once imagined, quieter than I had once wanted, but it was entirely mine. For the first time in my adult life, that felt like more than enough.